Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to be talking about the results of our annual survey. And I know quite a lot of you on the webinar this morning have taken part in the survey. So thanks very much for doing that. It's something that we really enjoy doing at PPN, and just to get some really good insights into what's going on in your procure to pay teams. And as we go through the webinar, you do have the chance to ask any questions that you might like to ask in you should see a chat function probably on the right hand side of your screen. So if you just put any questions that you have at any point through the webinar, just put them into that chat function, and then we can answer those questions and address those questions at the end. So as I said, we're really grateful for all of you who have taken part of the survey. It gives us a really good, clear picture and indication of what's going on in the UK, because of course, you know, we might say, for example, that a no PO, no pay policy is a really good policy to have, but it's interesting to find out what's actually going on from a cultural or technological standpoint for all of the UK procure to pay teams. And I'm delighted for this survey to have been able to conduct that in participation with Avalara. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Altan Fadil from Avalara. Altan, perhaps if you wanted to introduce yourself to everybody, so everyone knows who you are. And for the bright-eyed amongst you, you might realise that Altan is not Alex Bolf. Unfortunately, Alex is somewhere, I think, in a plane, having been held up at an airport. I'm sure we've all been there. So thanks very much, Altan, for standing in his place this morning.
No problem. Thank you, Ellen, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Altan Fadil. I manage the international sales team for Avalara, and we cover EMEA, and I look after a number of sales people who will cross-sell multiple products from our Avatax tooling for calculating taxable items from shipping into the US, e-invoicing solutions, and our VAT solutions as well. So it's a real pleasure to be here today, and hopefully I can be the Alex for the morning.
Thanks very much, Altan, and I'm sure you will. So in the survey, we found out that obviously quite a number of really interesting points and factors around digitization and the acceleration of that. And we found that for about a quarter of our respondents, that they had accelerated their digitization drive as a result of that their digital program, but also as a result of invoice mandates coming into play across the globe. Is that something which you find in your conversations with the organizations that you speak to?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, Ellen, we speak to quite a diverse range of customers at Avalara, and our experience sort of echoes what we see in the survey, really. Digitization to improve manually intensive tasks has grown significantly, especially during COVID. I mean, additionally, we've seen introduction of new mandates and mandate updates. And these have also been quite a major driver in companies to accelerate that digital transformation journey.
Yeah, and we were looking at, in relation to that and talking to the survey participants about VIDA, VAT in the digital age. We were fairly surprised that that still seems like a fairly distant idea to some of the respondents as part of that drive. Do you think that concept or that idea of VIDA being something distant needs to be something that they address? And if so, maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, you're right. I mean, the implementation of VIDA or VAT in a digital age, as its full term, is now due for Jan 27, and that recently changed based on some discussions with the EU and their member states. But UK organisations understanding Vida it is important, and it's important for a few reasons. Firstly, I'd say potential future impact. Although the UK has left the EU, it still trades heavily in that market space. So staying informed about Vida, the regulations, and so forth, it really ensures a smoother process for businesses that deal with EU customers. Secondly, and similar, is the move to similar VAT reforms. While the UK has obviously its own VAT system, Vida focuses on that digital digital transaction and streamlining VAT collection, and that could of course influence future UK VAT reforms. So understanding Vida can really help businesses in the UK prepare themselves for any potential domestic changes that could be on its way. And sort of finally, it's the competitive edge part of it. Understanding that digital VAT landscape can give you an edge. It can. And if you're planning to expand into the EU in the future, being familiar with Vida and what it brings and how it works can obviously save time and resources later down the line. So I would kind of say in summary, even though Vida's implementation isn't imminent, UK businesses familiarizing themselves with it is only going to be an advantage as we move forwards.
It's something there in the future, as you say, is something that organisations need to be prepared for, and I suppose at the same time, whilst you're doing that, you're enabling more control and more compliance in your organisations at the same time. One of the things that we found as a result of the survey is sort of almost like a continuation of what we found over the last year as a result of still as a result of COVID, where you find that some organisations are doubling down on the fact that they're wanting to maybe hold back on any further investment in digitization, and those who see digitization as a way to drive things forward. And so you've got those two different dichotomies in place at the same time. Maybe you could talk to us from your perspective about the dangers of maybe one of those or each of those dynamics in the workforce.
Well, I mean, this is actually, I find this quite an interesting subject area actually, and from an Avalara perspective, we actually saw quite a jump in customers digitizing their processes during that COVID period, and that was obviously because of the way that COVID it enforced people to operate more remotely, and that really expedited that digital transformation. And in some companies, we saw that by several years. They had plans and they jumped ahead by several years. I mean, the good thing about that was that the companies that did that, excuse me, that they managed to gain the advantages of that automation, removing repetitive tasks, making things less error prone earlier than they would have done. However, saying that, obviously, some companies that rushed into that COVID space and they rushed ahead with their digital strategies, they, how can I put it nicely, may not have been as developed as they should have been from a digital strategy perspective, and that then caused issues with struggling around adoption and implementation and bedding into their companies. On flip side, sorry, Ellen.
No, I was just saying, if organisations are rushing into something, it can be it can cause other kind of problems as well, can't it? Because you've got the digitization and the rush to that for the reasons that we've spoken about. But actually, if you haven't prepared yourself in the run up to that properly, then it can cause other kind of issues that maybe you hadn't thought about as well.
Yeah, 100%. And we've seen some of that. And as I was saying, like on the flip side of that, organizations that sort of clamp down on cost controls have been affected by slightly different issues we've seen. So what we've seen is they've had a bigger impact to them has been around the silent redundancy, I think is the term, where people are, leaving the industry and leaving business, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to replace them. This has caused a spike in wages, especially within AP area.
Yeah.
And they, due to not digitizing, they've been more prone to that spike than companies who took a bit of a jump earlier on in the process.
But there are still, coming on to the next slide here, there are still barriers, aren't there? So we've seen that acceleration of digitization in a lot of organizations, driven by a variety of different factors. But you can see from the slide in front of you that there are a number of barriers that are still in place that are stopping organizations from that acceleration path. Maybe from your perspective and the companies that you've spoken to, Altan, which of those barriers would you say is the most significant and maybe causes the most problems for the organizations that you deal with?
So I think from my experience, I think this differs quite significantly dependent on the size of company. So from an SMB to mid-market and into enterprise organization. So within an SMB space, the main drivers are predominantly a lack of budget. As you move into that, excuse me, mid-market area, the budget and resource seems to be the main blockers. And then when we move into that enterprise-based customer, it's mainly affected by resource, and that's the resource availability and the knowledge of the resource in order to apply and run the digitization programs. I think the key here really is about forward planning, and you know, if businesses can forward plan and they can stay ahead of things such as mandates, you know, maybe working with partners such as Avalara and groups such as PPN, that can help build and get a better understanding of what a digital strategy should look like as they move forwards for success.
Yeah, it's absolutely having that plan in place makes all the difference, and goes back to what we were saying just now as well. I mean, we found as a result of the survey that there's around 27% of organisations in the UK have now adopted end-to-end and touchless e-invoicing. But maybe you could tell us some of the main benefits of organisations doing that, because you know you've got the barriers that you see in front of you, but perhaps if we talk a little bit more about what are the benefits are from e-invoicing, and at the same time, Altan, if you could, do you think there's some confusion still about what an e-invoicing is? I mean, we certainly did find that within the survey, but maybe talk to us a little bit about the advantages of e-invoicing and why perhaps there's that confusion about an e-invoicing. And then I guess, does that matter ultimately?
Sure. I mean, I've now had the pleasure of sort of working within this invoice automation space for sort of, I don't know, over 10 years in different roles across different companies, from where I am now at Avalara, and then previously working within a BPO space for outsourcing invoice processing. And I'm actually really pleased to see this number. I'm really pleased to see this number, and I know this will continue to grow as organizations continue to evolve those digital strategies, and of course governments all over the world start to introduce more and more e-invoicing driven mandates. The benefits e-invoicing gives you is multiple. I mean, I think there's lots of different benefits. These range from faster invoicing processing, the ability to access things such as early payment discounts, improvement on DSO, reduced levels of fraud because of the way that the invoices are created and so forth. You know, these are really inherent benefits that e-invoicing brings, and it is you know the future as we move forward. We do still see some confusion around what an actual e-invoice is, predominantly around, you know, what is the difference between an e-invoice and a PDF file? Why is a PDF file not an e-invoice? I would say this is becoming less and less. And that's a lot of that's been driven through organizations like yours, Ellen, like the PPN and other organizations and providers who provide some really good thought leadership into the marketplace that's helping to position that. But yeah, I mean, whether it matters about it, I would say, you know, it's important that people do understand the difference, because you know, you have to know what's required when the mandates come out, and when the mandates come into place, you need to be prepared. So, you know, working with partners, working with groups such as PPN, that's the key really, is to continually educate and build a solid foundation as you move forwards.
Absolutely, and make sure that you keep up to date, one, with those mandates as they're rolling out across the globe, and see how they are relevant to you and your organization, and to keep up with digitization and the legislation that goes alongside that at the same time. But of course, you know, automation and putting that in place can sometimes be a little bit of a tangle, can't it? Particularly if you've got a lot of legacy solutions in place, and there aren't many organizations that don't have any elements of digitization at all. So and we've certainly found in the results of this current survey that a lot of organizations had multiple instances of ERP, for example, and it can create a fairly complex picture, which is difficult to manage in itself. So if organizations are faced with this, Altan, what do you think that they should do? Where should their starting place be if they want to accelerate, but they're looking at their existing processes and kind of holding their hands up and saying, well, I don't know where to start this?
Yeah, and I mean, that's actually a very excellent question. I mean, we see many different types of customers, and this is commonplace, where we have companies that have acquired other companies. They've acquired multiple ERP systems, they're running legacy-based systems, and then suddenly they've got to work with some mandates, and a mandate comes in, and they've got to then be compliant with that mandate. Yeah, over the past, I said, I've been lucky enough to be working in this industry for 10+ years, and I've seen successes where companies have built solid plans, they've built transformation strategies, and they focus their resources. This then helps like drive true business benefits that they require in a measurable way. So, you know, sorry.
Now, I was just saying, again, it goes back to some of the conversation we had just now about making sure that you are prepared. If you've mapped out what you have existing in your organization, and perhaps who the people are along that process, then you're able, then you're sort of some way down the line to being able to do something about it. If you haven't got any visibility whatsoever, I think you need to put that legwork in up front. I'd say, from talking to a lot of the organizations that we do at PPN, if you don't put that legwork in up front and really trying to find out where your existing solutions are and who they impact, which departments they impact, then you know it's going to take you an awful long time and perhaps not get it right. So I think from what you're saying, Altan, it's making sure that you've got that the plans in place ahead. It's going to put you one step ahead of your competitors if you're able to do that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, just as an example, I think highlighted within the survey, there was a section, or there was an example about improvements to DSO. You know, and you could say, is this a planned and measured result of automation, or is this a byproduct of automation? And I know that I'm being, you know, there's quite nuancy there, but you know, a clear digital strategy would have outlined that as a KPI, as a key indicator of success. And therefore, it's important when you're undergoing change in an environment and an organization, and you know, adding automation to a business is change, so that it's change management. so it requires a good plan. And as I said earlier, utilize suppliers such as Avalara. We do this all the time. Utilize groups such as PPN to help develop those strategies and help to focus where businesses need to get the most benefit out of that automation process.
Yeah, and I guess the key word there is focus, isn't it? You've got to have a think about what you want your outcomes to be right from the start, and map out the process by which you can get there. At our
Excuse
summit,
me.
and I know at our a few people on the webinar this morning will have been to our annual summit at the Hurlingham Club in London last week. In fact, this time last week. One of the things that we talked about there was collaboration and collaboration across the different elements of procure to pay. And we're pleased to see that a lot of organisations are collaborating effectively, and there are obviously still a way to go. Um, do you feel that it's technology's job to enable this, or do you think it's more of a cultural standpoint? And what can organizations do to affect either of those elements in their own organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that technology is often the enabler for change.
Mm,
However, technology on its own really, it's not going to deliver. It's probably not the best thing to say from a tech company, but technology on its own won't deliver the desired results. It's a cultural and technology element that have to operate hand in hand, and collaboration's key for this being successful. It's, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's when you're adding digitization or automation into an organization, it's change.
mm,
And therefore it requires a level of change management, and that change management needs to be linked to an overarching strategy, and that strategy is with clear development KPIs. Is how are we going to move from here to here, and what's the benefit? Are we going to be a centralized process, a decentralized process? What are the factors, and then how, by implementing that, do we get that cross-departmental collaboration to make that successful? And all that is underpinned, of course, with technology, which is often the enabler to make that happen. But like I say, on its own, it's not going to drive to where we need to be. It needs to be a combination of multiple factors.
Yeah, a combination of those two things, I guess, then, Alton. And it's and I suppose technology by itself, as you say, is not going to do it. It's the people within our organisations that we have to think of. I guess, as you're saying, it's if you're going through a transformation project, then it's the people that you're impacting, even though, like you say, it's underpinned by technology. And I always think at the moment we're at a point where organizations really have the capability to make some advances that they wouldn't have done in the past, even if they had the will to do that, because we now have the technology to help us. And certainly there's one of the things that we found in the survey was that analytical ability for organizations, and the need for that has certainly grown in the last year. And an advance in, if not necessarily AI in organizations, certainly an advance in the awareness of what AI can do for organizations, particularly around being able to reduce cost and keep up with compliance and other regulatory factors as well. From your perspective, Alton, how important do you think analytics are to an organization?
So, I mean, obviously, as coming from a technology company that operates within, tax and the invoicing space, we understand the importance of analytics. They're hugely important, and with meaningful data and the appropriate KPIs, it makes a real difference to your business. It really does.
Mm,
And with the constant changes in mandates, for example, introduction of VIDA, and for any of you trade multinationally, you know, tax rate changes in multiple jurisdictions, excise duties, the change in excise duties constantly, staying sort of abreast of this and ahead without technology and its supporting analytics, I would say is almost impossible today. It's almost impossible without that analytics and the tech that drives it. So for me, I think they're hugely important in a controlled manner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But and this comes back to a few conversations I've had with people at the summit actually last week and at other times. It's analytics are important for all of the reasons that you've just said, but it's not just about collecting that data and making sure that we or if we have certain KPIs, it's not just about collecting that. It's about what we do with them too, isn't it? And being able to measure against some of those outcomes, do you think?
Exactly, and I mean, you know, data without an end goal is kind of meaningless, really. It's just a load of numbers. But you know, we have to use the data to target areas for improvement. You know, for example, if we take from the report, I think it's saying 11% of organisations regularly measure early settlement discounts, which is great. But you know, how can we improve this? It's the data that's going to inform us. That's going to inform us. It's going to help us with how can we improve it. What would it mean if we could grow that figure? What benefit would that be financially to the companies who could efficiently measure and react? You know, where we've seen success as a business is within organizations who have successfully automated processes and then utilized data from those automation processes to improve as they go along. It's an iterative process, so as they're getting more and more data, they're iteratively improving their processes and moving forward continuously. It's driving the changes and targeting, allowing us to pinpoint and target where to improve.
Yeah, and I guess if you're measuring some of those metrics that you can see up on the screen there, it gives you a broader and wider picture of how your organization is doing. You know, if you're wanting to be a growth-driven organization, or if your your CFO has targeted you with being a growth-driven organization, and you're going to need to be able to measure some of those factors in front of you. And without the analytics and data in place and the technology underlining it, it's quite difficult to do. You know, you're going to need to know your cost per invoice. One of the things that we were surprised about is the number of organizations who are not measuring that statistic, or rather not able to. And I guess that goes back to not being able to, you haven't got the analytics and the technology in place to be able to do that. And it stops organizations then from having that bigger picture. And I suppose that then feeds into one of the other trends and that we found was being able to manage your cash properly. Cash is the lifeblood of our organizations, but you need to be able to have certain levels of visibility to be able to do that properly. So what do you think organizations can do to maximize those levels of visibility?
I would say, you know, automation and automating in that controlled manner, number of processes, it is going to really help. You know, following that digital transformation strategy, for want of a better word, can pinpoint where we need to focus with the analytics to drive that. Monitoring these improvements can be done in multiple areas. So, you know, you could monitor how can we automate matching? How can we automate our two-way, three-way matching? How can we automate applying GL coding to our invoices, automating approvals? You know, we can even get to a point where how can we get to, maybe our nirvana is to say we want to get to a point where we're going all the way through to a managed by exception only workflow, whereas everything's coming in and at the end of the day we're just managing by exception. So you know, the digitization of invoices via processes such as e-invoicing, for argument's sake, that increases all of these areas, can help to increase all these areas. But it needs to be monitored, reported, and as previously discussed, you know, iterations of change. But this has to be done in conjunction with cultural changes, because like we discussed earlier, it's change management.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the cultural change, sorry.
No, I was just thinking, you know, we talked about AI and the growth and the awareness of AI in organizations. Can that be something which helps here in terms of being able to manage cash better? You talked about invoice approvals and statement reconciliation. Could AI help more here? And you know, what can we do to enable that, do you think?
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, you know, as with other suppliers, Avalara, we already have AI, you know, baked into several of our processes, and this is only going to increase. I see AI personally working very much in conjunction with machine learning and the cultural change required to progress this along. You know, like you mentioned, I kind of said or touched on it, that there's several processes that a number of suppliers already do today that utilize AI that can take, you know, an incoming document, classify it, look at the line item data, match that against a master data file, perform two-way matching, three-way matching, even applying GL coding and within boundaries, even approving it for payment. So there is there, but you know, that in itself needs to be managed and run with the cultural changes required to operate in an efficient way with all of the data and reporting that it provides in order for a true digital change strategy to then move that forward. So they need to all work in conjunction with each other. But as in regards to AI, that's here to stay and is only going to get better. Is only going to get better and help businesses as it progresses.
It's funny actually, because one of the things that I always say is that you know, we're not going to find ourselves ever in an organization where we become less and less digital. You know, so it's in organizations and the people within them's you need to be able to become a little bit more educated yourself in terms of AI and technology and digitization and what it can do for you and maybe your career, and also the company that you work with, because we're never going to find ourselves in a situation where we have more and more and more paper in our organizations. It's only ever going to go towards becoming more digitized, and the benefits that we can find from implementing AI within our processing as well. And of course, one of the things that visibility and digitization can do is it can help prevent errors in the system and also fraud. And unfortunately, you know, fraudulent activity is ongoing. And you know, we found this year that 45% of organizations were affected by fraud over the previous 3 years. Um, I just wanted to ask you, Altan, do you think that, from your perspective, do you think that fraud is more commonplace now, or do you think it's just something which is being discovered more?
I think personally, I think that, you know, I think the fraudsters have just become far more aggressive and creative. That's what they've done. They've and in part that's been made possible through additions of digital processes such as emails and PDF and so forth. But you know, I think you know, organizations need to be like extra vigilant at the moment, and educating organizations on how to protect themselves is really quite key here. I think also the utilizations of technology such as e-invoices also really helps, because it's not a QR code, it's not a PDF file, it's a, you know, it's a digital transformation of data, and that helps mitigate that risk as well. So, you know, unfortunately, this is a growing trend in that we see, and it is something we all need to be sort of extra vigilant about, and through both, a human perspective, but also where, adding the right technology to protect our businesses as we move forwards.
And that 45,000, goodness, 45%, probably a little bit more than 45,000, isn't it? That 45% figure, is that something which surprises you? Is that something that you have when talking to organizations that you would have expected, or is it a surprise?
It's a bit of a surprise, but I mean, unfortunately, it's a sign of the times. It's a bit higher than I thought it would be. I'll be honest with you, but yeah, I mean, it's a sign of the times, and it really is one of the reasons why, when we speak to customers, we strongly advise them to develop and build that strong digital strategy and implement processes such as e-invoicing that help mitigate the risks and future-proof them as they move forwards.
And I guess it's that, isn't it? All of those things come hand in hand. If you're managing your cash properly and you've got that visibility up and down your processes and you've got the right people involved, what you're doing is minimizing the chances of that fraud, I guess, happening in your own organization. There's nothing you can do to prevent fraudsters existing and wanting to defraud companies, but I guess what you can try and do is try and stop that happening in your own organization and put those controls in place as much as you're able to. And if you've got e-invoicing, to some extent that goes some way down the line to being able to do that. So with some of the trends that we found as a result of the survey, we've got them there in front of you. What do you think that the three main trends that came out of it, what do they mean for the industry from your perspective?
I feel that this indicates real step change in the industry to a much more digitally government monitored process. I mean, e-invoicing mandate growth is a direct response to VAT gaps in countries, and these countries have seen e-invoicing as a way of addressing these gaps. This will continue to grow. E-invoicing will in the future be, it will replace PDF as the single biggest invoice mechanism. I have no doubt about that as we move forward. If we look at also VIDA, VIDA with its real-time reporting, that's based on 3 pillars, and pillar number 1 very much around e-invoicing, and the EU are introducing that to reduce or try and mitigate some of the 97 billion euro gap that they reported back in 2022. So this is a real step change in the business. I think from a collaboration point of view, that is key. I think we all know, I don't think I have to tell anyone this, but we all know, operating in a siloed environment will hamper any sort of cultural change required to benefit from automation. We need to work closely together. We need to work as a more collaborative across a business, because automation will provide benefits holistically, not just in single areas, but it will provide that holistically, and we need to work as it in a holistic view. And finally, AI, as I said, I mean that's here to stay, and that will continue to grow and benefit business as we move forward. I think the key for me on the AI part is as with any technology, it needs to be used in a controlled way, underpinned by good cultural change, clear business goals, and a good change management process implemented into the businesses, and that will deem success as businesses move forward.
So, so again, I guess it's about understanding where your organization is right now, mapping that change, getting the right people on board, and being prepared for the future. So I think that's kind of more or less brings us to the end of the webinar today. But if you've got some questions, do please put them into the chat function now, and we will of course be sharing the survey with everybody who is on the webinar today, and goes into some of the things that we've been talking about just now, of course, in deeper detail. So yes, if you've got some questions, put them forward to us now. We've got a few minutes now at the end of the webinar, but we do have some questions which have been sent in. Altan, is the UK going to implement mandated e-invoicing?
Oh, there's a question. I mean, at the moment, obviously, we work very closely, as we mentioned earlier, around VIDA and so forth. You know, we're working very closely. We trade very closely with our partners in the European Union. Within the UK, we have no e-invoicing matter apart from within a government organisation, and that's trading with NHS and certain government areas where it is mandatory for those organisations to have to accept a e-invoice if sent from a supplier.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to say. Is really the answer. I mean, I would be suggesting that it's, you know, although it's not imminent or potentially imminent, I would be suggesting that the general trend across the whole of Europe is going that way. Internationally, it's moving into e-invoicing, and a lot of countries have already implemented it. So for me, I would see it as only a matter of time, and preparing as a business and understanding, as we mentioned earlier, how things such as VIDA and the Pillar 1 e-invoicing affects you trading with the EU bloc would be my first point of call. I would get up to speed on that, utilize organizations such as PPN, Avalara, and other suppliers, build that knowledge and start to create that that plan for the future.
Makes a lot of sense, Altan, and I think even from a benefits perspective as well that we spoke about, you know, even if you're thinking, well, e-invoicing mandates are not necessarily going to affect me, but the benefits that as we've discussed from e-invoicing, it makes sense to be prepared and think of your organization as one fit for purpose in the future as well. Another question here. How VIDA will impact e-invoicing in countries where they already have it in place. So how is VIDA likely to impact e-invoicing in countries where they already have it in place?
Yeah, I mean, potentially it may well do, because it mean some changes, technical changes, as things try to align and become more standardized. VIDA is based on three main principles, or three main areas, and that number one is the implementation of e-invoicing, so that the reporting can be captured, that the reporting of tax revenues. So yeah, I mean, basically, as this rolls out and becomes more of a reality across the 27 member states, where we already see invoicing in place, there will be adjustments made to those processes in order to fall in line with the new VIDA mandate.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, how does Avalara prepare businesses for the new mandates?
So yeah, I mean, we've got I mean, Alex would probably have been far more eloquent at answering this question than me, but we have a big, you know, team of people at Avalara. We are constantly monitoring changes in the market. We sit on a number of advisory boards and advisory groups, and we have the information, and we're gathering and building the information on what's going on in the market, where we are. Our roadmap of our ELR product is mirrored with the future growth of e-invoicing. So we would work with our customers, and we do work with our customers and our partners in order to help them, number one, formulate that digital strategy. So how best to move forwards into the future? How do we position ourselves best to enable not only automation benefits, but also how do we stay compliant and remain compliant? at Avalara, we follow something. We have a set of success traits at Avalara, and they're called OPA focus. Okay, and from those traits, you know, I would say that, you know, companies need to be curious about the future, need to be adaptable to change, and also need to have fun doing it. So, you know, that's kind of the key, I would say, around these things.
I like that, Altan. That sounds like a really a good place to leave the conversation. Fun while you're doing it. It's
Easier
great.
said than done.
Easier said than done, but I think that, you know, if you're an organization that's going on the right track, and you've got, as I said, got the right people involved, you've got the right processes involved, and you've got a good clear eye on the outcomes that you want to achieve and how you map to them, I think, you know, it goes a long way to actually feeling like you are a productive and useful person to your organization. And I think when you've got those kind of factors and elements involved, then that's where the fun element can be as well. You know, and we all want to work in an organization which is future focused and one that's growing. So if you've got these elements in place, it goes some way to being able to do that. So thanks very much, Altan, for your conversation today and for your thoughts on the survey. And as I said, we will be sharing the more expansive results of the survey with everybody, and it's hot off the press, so you'll be the first to get it after this webinar this morning. And I think, Altan, because we ran a little incentive as well through Avalara, and I think, Altan, you just wanted to share a little bit of news with people as well just before we finish.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I'm really pleased to, you know, thank everyone who took part and helped with gathering the data, and we ran a small incentive in there for this, and I'm really pleased to announce that David Ward from Suez will be receiving the £150 Amazon gift card voucher very shortly.
Fantastic.
Thank you, David.
Well, yes, thank you, David, and thank you to everybody for taking part in the survey. As I said at the beginning, it makes a really big difference to gain some insight into what's really going on in the organisations in the PPN community. So thanks very much for taking part in that, and of course, thank you to Avalara for supporting the survey. I really do appreciate it. And of course, thank you, Altan, for sharing your thoughts on the survey with everybody this morning. And if anybody's got any further questions, I'm sure, Altan, you'll be happy to answer those after the webinar, and of course so will I, or anybody else within PPN team or Avalara team. So thank you very much, and thanks for joining us this morning, and have an enjoyable rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.